economy was pissed off when I graduated college. It was 2009, right at the start of the Great Recession, and I handled it like most of my peers did, by courageously postponing adulthood for as long as possible. I worked at my college, lived near my college, and lethargically supported the Occupy Wall Street movement via social media. I was so brave back then. I made a promise to myself that no matter how bad the recession got, I would not move back home. But when I lost my job, the promise basically broke itself. On top of that, my 3-year relationship with my college girlfriend ended. She was my last connection to a town that was done with me the moment I collected my overpriced diploma, so I limped back to my hometown of Poway. On the drive south, my Honda loaded up with a few meager possessions. I claimed a small victory in the fact that I was moving home 2 years after everyone else in my graduating class did the same thing. Or at least everyone who graduated with a liberal arts degree. I hung out with my old friends, the other wandering nomads of the class of '09, in the parts of San Diego that included people our own age. One night we landed at Blind Lady Ale House. It became my favorite watering hole, and Normal Heights, my favorite zip code. We boozed around in the alehouse with its tables of reclaimed wood, soft and porous from a decade of soaked-in beer, bearing stains and scuffs like ancient glyphs. Bikes and skateboards hung from the ceiling, and flyers for local bands and art shows adorned the walls. I went with my best friend, a brash and occasionally offensive guy who uses terms like wet chode in regular conversation. Don't Google it. The only thing getting us through or underemployment those days was India Pale Ale. Today, a triple IPA has the propulsive power to end my night at 9 p.m. and the next night at 7. But back then, we crushed them like Coronas. And late in the evening, she was right next to me. I acquired her phone number by either dropping some random movie facts or slinging some political bullshit. Those are my 2 and only plays, really. But this also had something to do with it. I was 25 and she was hot. She was 35 and we were drunk. She put her phone number into my Galaxy S2 and it was game on. I waited a respectful 24 hours to call her. I didn't text, I called. I thought a 35-year-old woman would appreciate the old school move. It worked. She scored tickets for a Friday night beer bus tour and invited me along. We started back at Blind Lady, then sailed the craft beer trade winds all the way down 30th to South Park. I tried to keep the nostalgic college talk to a minimum, figuring there was little value in more reminders of our age discrepancy. So I kept my attention on her as I bought us round after round with a debit card tied to a dwindling bank account. The night came to a quiet end in her bedroom in her own house. We fell asleep after midnight, heavily slowed by the drinks. There's something comical about waking up one morning in a beautiful woman's bed, then going to sleep that night in your childhood one. I lived with my parents rent-free. She lived by herself and paid a mortgage. You would think that such a power dynamic disparity would have motivated me to find a job even harder. You'd be wrong. My recently terminated college relationships still stung, and every one of my attempts to locate my identity over the last few years involved lukewarm mixed drinks, video games, and mediocre fiction I shared in creative writing classes. So the label of employed felt less important than the label of boyfriend. It was an identity I could grasp, a way I valued myself and how I thought my family valued me, especially my brothers, both of whom enjoyed relationships that spanned years. Here was an opportunity to discard my single status, and I would do so in spectacular form. So the next time my whole family was in town for a reunion, I invited her. I showed her off to everyone. My brothers, my parents, my racist aunt, and a recent addition to the family, my uncle's latest wife, who was actually 2 years younger than my new paramour. This happened only 2 weeks after I met her. I discovered more about her through my family's interrogation than I ever did on my own. She'd spent a year living in Madrid. She had a dangerously psychotic brother. She was a vegan, the judgmental kind, who faced my family, a carnivorous clan who subsidized local butcher shops like the government bailed out General Motors. I knew my family didn't like her. I knew they had opinions, but I heard none of them. And not because I was infatuated and deaf to their points, but because they didn't tell me. My family exercises restraint when one of us chooses an inappropriate person to date. They admirably keep their mouths shut and wait for you to realize that someone is wrong for you all on your own. It's healthier that way. There's growth. My family remained silent, knowing this road towards discovery was one I would need to find alone. I wasn't anywhere near the road. I was riding dunes in the desert of infatuation and succumbing to her influence without even realizing it. I turned into an insufferable ass, assailing my parents with my newfound dogma from the church of that one girl. Those snarky lessons she taught me about nutrition, politics, and religion. I lectured my mom on her flagrant usage of canola oil instead of coconut oil, committing the crime of criticizing a mother's cooking in her own kitchen. I turned down breakfast like bacon and bagels, preferring the self-righteous sustenance of fruits, nuts, and ancient grains. And I made sure everyone in the house knew about it, even while privately noting the unusual things those grains did to my bowels. I combined my new flame's political opinions with that year's presidential election news cycle like a bored kid mixing Windex with bleach. I challenged my conservative father's politics more than usual, but it wasn't my voice decrying tax cuts for the 1%, it was hers. And it was a voice my dad ignored, whether it was coming out of my mouth or hers. Frankly, I'm surprised he didn't just put up the money to kick me out of the house and into my first apartment. Because I certainly couldn't afford rent on my own. I was stuck in an economy that guffawed at anyone holding a liberal arts degree, while my two brothers enjoyed dignified employment with the US Navy. I bounced from blogging gigs to editing the self-published books of Mount Soledad High Society, then back to blogging. I was on probation from a DUI conviction, had only recently recovered my driver's license, and I owed 10 grand to the court. I had a lot weighing me down. Please forgive me for inflating my feelings about a woman who at least appreciated me for my penis. And a woman who appreciated other less conventional interests like handcuffs and pink leather dog collars and choking. By that point, I'd only slept with 2 women who both did the deed rather conventionally. The positions made sense, the angles were expected, and it was all over quicker than I'd wished. But this was more experimental. This wasn't mere coitus, it was calculus. And like every math class I ever took, very little of it made sense. The first time she pulled out the dog collar, I had no idea what to do. She guided my hand to the chain and told me to choke her. I'd been raised to revere the female body, not damage it, but she insisted. I gave it a timid pull. In that moment, I was reminded of a fishing trip I took at age 13. I'd pulled a wriggling fish out of the sea, and the skipper gave me the aluminum bat to put it out of its misery. I delivered a feeble whack to the fish's head, and it kept on flopping. I tried once more to no effect until the skipper took the bat and delivered a single swift blow that rendered the fish motionless on the deck. I was about as successful at choking this woman as I was at beating sockeye salmon to death. She'd clearly been choked by more willing partners, by saltier seamen. But with a little coaxing and her insistence that I wouldn't hurt her, I got the hang of it. I pulled harder and she moved faster, but I never got anything of value from it. It wasn't for me. Sometimes her unique interests appeared outside the bedroom. One evening I drove her home from a bar and she was drunk and hyperverbal, trying to rile me up. I focused on the road as she squirmed in the passenger seat like a petulant child. Then she reached across the center console and seized my throat with clawed fingers. I wrenched her hand away and pushed her back against the window, a little harder than I meant to. Her demeaning laugh tested my patience. And yet, I stuck with her. There was something about her that boosted my confidence. Being with her was an inoculation against fear and doubt. I could do anything. I could get a job. I could find my purpose. I could nail the Final Jeopardy clue, watching at home with my parents the next night. But my surplus of confidence lacked a fundamental realization. Sometimes people just like to fuck. Was she really looking for something serious with a man a full decade younger than her? I didn't consider this because I thought she loved me and that I loved her. I was a starry-eyed kid, hoping for a future with a woman who stood before me, 10 years older, naked and ready, wearing a spiked dog collar and twirling a chain leash in her hand. One night in the middle of our totally not relationship, I became terribly sick. I woke up at 3 a.m., my body doing horrible things. My dad brought me to an urgent care center where I collapsed from dehydration in the waiting room. I woke up with an IV in my arm that asked for my phone. I texted her the news and received no reply. Recovering at home for the next week, I heard nothing. I was unfamiliar with the term at the time, but this was my first experience with ghosting. She didn't go full poltergeist on me. To her credit, she eventually asked me to come over for dinner. Much like other nights, I grabbed some vegan food on the way over. The orange-flavored chicken from Loving Hut was my favorite. Walking through the door, the heat from the takeout radiating through the plastic bag, I was eager to pick up where we left off. But before I could consume any soy-based protein, she said, "We need to talk." She delivered some standard breakup fare about being in different points in our lives. I can't remember the details. But I offered little protest to the breakup because I knew there was nothing to break. Whatever this was had run its course. I drove home. I stopped at an In-N-Out along the way and ordered a 3x3 cheeseburger. I found clarity in the beef. My family's cold reception of her suddenly made sense, and I finally felt like the asshole everyone already thought I was. When I told my brother that she dumped me, he texted me back a single word: good. Now is my family's chance to tell me what they really thought of her. Back at the reunion party to which I so proudly invited her, she was rudely opinionated, abrasive. She got drunk and made off-color remarks to the woman who'd eventually become my sister-in-law. The economy recovered. President Obama was reelected. I got a job writing more words into the internet, and for once I didn't click the defer button on my student loans. My friends and I staked out a cozy spot in Rancho Bernardo for bar trivia, leaving rowdier places alone for the time being. I eventually earned enough to afford a first month's rent, and I hauled boxes out of my parents' house to my waiting Honda. There was a 450 square foot studio in North Park, a half an hour's drive down the 805. It was moving day, and I had work to do. Thank you.
Brent Hannify.